As usual, we are going to start off with a live demonstration by Andy Van Straten. Today he's going to show muscle rigging starting from scratch, which we haven't done before. And then we'll move on to a Q&A as usual, so you can ask any questions about everything you've just seen, and then any additional questions that are related to the rigging process. But then after that, we're going to have a quick chat about our upcoming version of Ziva VFX. As you might have seen in the emailers, there's a new version coming out, and so we have a bunch of new tools. So we thought this was the great time to kind of tease them a little bit, let everyone know what to expect. And then in upcoming tutorials and videos, we'll have more on actually how to use the tools. And then we'll have another Q&A if you have any questions about everything you've just seen. I think that's about it. You ready to go, Andy?
Yeah. So, okay, thanks, Ashton, for that. So we've had quite a few questions come in. We always get questions emailed to the company and have sort of feedback surveys and things like that. So there's been quite a few questions around muscle rigging and best practices and things like that. So I figured I'd go through the delts, I think, and the pecs, because it's kind of a challenging muscle group. So there's a few more advanced concepts with that, like putting sort of multiple fibers on a muscle and things like that. So I figured I'd go through and then sort of talk through my choices as I'm going. So I can just start actually in this scene. So this has got our range of movement bone animation here. And I'm just going to start by adding in the delts. So I'll hide this other stuff. And then I'm just going to make this a Ziva tissue object. So under the Ziva menu, add simulation component tissue. And I'm just going to leave the default tap mesh there for now. I'm not going to alter that. So beforehand, I already made the animated bone objects as Ziva bones. For this demo, I've just imported the alembic bake of the bones and converted them all to Ziva bones instead of going through the blend shape thing, which we normally do. But cool. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to be quite particular about the vertices I'm going to pick for the attachments. So at this end, it's not too important. I'm just going to grab a couple here. And then I'll shift select the bone object and then make an attachment. And then at this end, where the deltoid's attaching onto the scapula, I'm going to be like extra picky about the vertices that I choose. So if I isolate these two objects at the same time, what I'm going to try and do is just grab basically a row of vertices if that's possible. And the reason for that is if you have basically the fewer vertices that you have, the more play that you'll get in the attachment. And by that I mean, if you have more, if I was to select all these along here like this, it's going to stabilize the attachment because what's happening is the attachment's actually, it is on the mesh, but it's attaching the tetrahedron that it's inside. So if you have more, then you have more points within that tetrahedron. It's harder for it to rotate. And in our case, we kind of want the delt to rotate or pivot a bit at this attachment point. So I'm going to be quite particular about grabbing these vertices. And then I'll shift select the bone object. And then I'll make an attachment. And if we look at the, I'll hide that now. If you look at the attachment, you see that the default is 1 × 10⁸, which I think is going to be a little bit too stiff for this particular attachment because we kind of want to leave a bit of play in the attachment so it can kind of move a little bit as the deltoid's rolling around. So I'm going to try 1 × 10⁶ to start, and then I'm also going to attach the clavicle as well. So again, I'll isolate select. I often jump in and out of isolate select when I'm working. That's just a nicer way to work because it's less cluttered. So let's grab these. Go to X-ray. Yeah, and then Ziva add attachment, and also make this 1 times 10 to the 6. Cool. And then, so I play this back and start inspecting what this looks like. Cool. So you can see that it might be slightly too weak because the muscle's kind of really sliding off the bone there, but I'm just going to carry on playing it anyway. You'll also notice that if I go back to this frame here, you'll notice that there's quite a bit of curve in the delt there, and that's probably not right for that pose, but when we add in the pecs and stuff in a bit, you'll see a little bit less of that. So it's a pretty nice result considering it's only kind of like 5 minutes of setup at the moment. There's no fibers or anything in there. So one cool thing that is really key when you're looking at the delts is to try and get this pocket in here. And we're starting to lose it a little bit now because I think that attachment's too weak. So I'm going to go back. And so one script that I have, which is kind of useful, is to be able to select 2 objects and then get the attachment between them, which I have this cycle shared attachments thing, which is kind of handy. So I might just make that 5 times stronger. And in the new features in Ziva 1.4, there's, we'll talk about that stuff later, but there's a panel that's going to help you select attachments rather than trying to dig through the channel box like that. So the other reason I'm kind of being particular about this attachment is if it's too stiff or there's too many attachment points, what will happen is the attachment can't pivot, or the tet can't pivot, and then therefore the bend when the humerus goes up is propagated down to the lower tets, if that makes sense. So you end up with kind of like a U curve or a J curve in your muscle, which isn't ideal. I have to probably clear the cache. All right, so that's starting already to be a bit better. Cool. All right, so I'm going to go through now. I'm just going to build up the system of muscles. So you notice, like, for those of you who know Ziva quite well, will already know this, but it's worth saying anyway, is that one of the advantages of our system is that the muscles will kind of know about each other, or they can do if you're running collisions and making attachments. And that's not the case with other systems. So it's quite a powerful feature. So when I start building the pec and attachments and things, it's going to affect the position or the performance of the deltoid. So create a tissue here as well for this guy. And then what I'm going to do is grab a few vertices here and then shift select bone, make an attachment. And then again, I'm going to be it's not probably so important for the pec, but just grab these vertices here, make an attachment. And then these ones, I'm going to do something like that. Attachment. And then what I'm going to do is I'm also going to attach these 2 muscles together. And to do that vertex selection, I'm going to use our select by proximity tool. So that's under the Ziva tools menu, coming down to select vertices, grab the option box. I'm just going to leave all that at default and hit select. And I'm happy with that vertex selection. And then I have to reselect the pec and then Ziva add attachment. And that attachment is going to be too stiff. So I definitely want to see a bit of play between these 2 muscles, but I kind of want them to follow each other. So I'll make this something like 5 times 10 to the 5. See how that looks. So you can see here that there's probably too much movement on at the bottom of the pec, so I'm going to add another attachment there. Play it again. Cool. All right, so now when you look at this, if I look at the pec by itself, you're going to see that shape there, you can see that there's a hard line, and that's because the resolution of the tet mesh is too low. So I need to have more tets overall, I think, for this muscle. So I can go across to the Z-tet node and change this to something like 6. One button that I have on my shelf will just reduce the tet size by a certain percentage. So I have this here, so I can just kind of do that until I'm happy or go back up, which is kind of a fun script that you might like to have on your shelf. Cool, so now you can see the curvature is a little bit more natural. But you'll also notice that this kind of buckling here, we don't want to see that. That's probably not the right anatomical result. What we ideally want to see is the pec line to be kind of straighter through here. So in order to do that, I'm going to make a fiber. So what I'll do is have that object selected, and then under the Ziva menu, I'll come down to Add Tissue Property Fiber. And for the most part, I'm pretty happy with the fiber field direction. But to be honest, because I just want to focus in this area here for this one, the first thing I'll do is paint off the weights for the fiber. So I'm not going to have it effective in any other area except this top part. So I'll select those vertices, then I'll right click on the mesh, come down to Paint, Z-Fiber 1 Weights, and then I'll just turn all that stuff off. And I can you can also just paint manually as well. Keep it like that. And then you can see that the fiber field direction is kind of going in the wrong direction up in this part of the pec. So I'm going to change the direction of the fiber field as well. So if I right click on the mesh, come down to Paint, Z-Fiber, this time I'm going to choose Endpoints. And you can see when we made it that Ziva automatically chose this point as the extreme end of the muscle. So we can alter that later, which is fine. So I'll turn this to 0.5. And you'll notice that we get, if I move this, I think, you get a warning. Ziva tells you that there's a solver error. The creature is null. And you might get a warning about it. Tail vertices are empty. Something to do with the fiber. Failed to create creature. Has a problem with endpoints, which is correct, because you always have to have, with fibers, you always have to have at least 1 point black and 1 point white, and the rest be 0.5. Otherwise, Ziva can't make a fiber field direction. So that's to be expected, that's fine. So now I'm going to add white back on here. You can see as I paint that the fiber field direction is changing as I paint that endpoint map. So I'm pretty happy with that fiber field direction now. And at the moment it's not doing anything. So what I want to do is have a line of action curve in here so that the muscle pulls straight when the arm's moving around. So I'm just going to make my own CV curve for this. So I know that the origin or insertion of this muscle is here, so I'm going to create an EP curve. So create curve tools, EP curve tool, and I'm going to select just with the vertex snap enabled. Make one there. I'm going to make the other one over here somewhere. Did that make it? Ah. Right, I just hide the pec for now so we can see it. So something like that. So as this curve gets shorter, we're going to see that the fiber is going to pull straight. Cool. So I'm going to rename this to right back curve. And then I'm going to rivet on the endpoints. First, I'll make a cluster, so we can do that. Form cluster. And then here I'm going to make a rivet. And this is all the kind of stuff you can script as well. And we do have scripts for working with this sort of stuff. Cool. So if I move that out of the way, if I move the timeline now, you can see that the curve's following along, which is great. And so if I bring back my pick, I have to select the curve first, and then the tissue object. And under the Ziva menu, I'll make a muscle line of action. Now, if I select the curve, you'll see it as listed as one of the outputs, so you know it's worked. And so now we just should be able to see the curve, the fiber at least firing, and it is, that's cool. So we've already got kind of a much straighter shape through here, which is exactly what we want to see. So just let it play through a few more frames. There's a pose around, I think it's in the 300s where the arms are kind of a bit more forward, and I just want to, right, here it is. So you can see that while the muscle is pulling tight here, it could kind of be a bit straighter through here. That profile, or that silhouette could probably be a bit straighter. So in order to do that, you can play with the strength of the fiber. So you could make this 10 times stronger. If I change the strength exponent value to 10 to the 4, and then hopefully that'll have a bit more effect. The other thing I'm going to do as well is I'm going to put a little bit of excitation on for the whole simulation. So I'm going to, so you know that with line of action that you can fire it using the curve, and you can also have keyed or just set attribute on excitation on top of the line of action stuff. So that's cool. And you can see when my cache finished there, it just pops in. I should clear the cache first. So on the first frame, you see it like kind of jump a little bit, and that's fine. To have a bit of tension through the muscle. And so now that the silhouette or the profile of that part of the muscle is a lot straighter through the animation. Yep. You'll notice as well, what I was talking about earlier is that the pec now is pulling down on the deltoid as well. So there's still a bit of a curve in here. We could make that stronger. They're going to be affecting each other. I think it's not too bad, but we can make this 10, say. It's going to follow it a bit more closely. Cool. So another thing that I want to do is, I mean, there's still a lot of this muscle that doesn't have a fiber on it. And so there's no limit to the number of fibers that you can put on a tissue. So I'm going to add a second one. And then Ziva, so add simulation, where is that again? Muscle fiber. And again, I'm going to change the fiber direction, because if you were to look up reference of the fiber direction on a pectoral muscle, you'll see that basically all along here, along this attachment part, is where the the fibers kind of flow into. So we can completely model that with endpoints. So paint fiber 2 this time, endpoints. And check that I'm painting white. So as I paint along here, you can see the fiber field direction change. And I'm not going to have it fire in this area because we already have a fiber there. So we'll paint Z fiber 2 whites, turn that to 0. And then I'm also going to connect, I'm going to use the same curve to do the excitation through line of action. So I'll select the curve. Now, because we have 2 fibers on here, the process is slightly different. Because if you only have 1 fiber, Ziva works out which fiber you're trying to attach to or connect a line of action to. But because we have 2, we have to specify it exactly. So I know that it's called Z fiber 2. So I'll select the curve first, and then I'll add Z fiber 2 to the selection, just using Malware. And then under Ziva, I'll come down and add muscle line of action. And you're going to see the performance of the muscle change now. So you can see also that the muscle changes, the fiber changes color as it's being excited. It's kind of a nice angle through there, I think. All right. So then you would go through and you'd kind of perhaps add the biceps, which we've done before, but I'll just do really quickly again. Actually, what I can do first is I'll do the lats. I haven't done the lats for a while, so I'm kind of going a bit off script, but I can do that for you guys because there's kind of a cool trick that you can do with Ziva to handle tenderness material. So just bear with me while I get through that. One of the things I've done as well is I have a marking menu, which basically wraps up the Ziva commands. So you can always get the Ziva commands if you run ziva.h, you'll get all that information about what you can run with Mel. So if you can, get these commands and put them into a marking menu, it's kind of useful because it can do all the renaming and things. So I have a marking menu here, for instance, create body muscle, and it does all the renaming and things for me. So it's just an idea for your workflows. It's really fast to kind of work like that, at least I find. So I'll make that into a tissue, done that, and then I'm going to use the select vertices by proximity tool again to make some attachments. And then add attachment. And then I'll do the same at this end. I'm going to widen the radius this time to get a few more of these verts. So make it 0.5. That's fine. So one thing with this is that it doesn't have the other muscles around it, so it's not going to give you exactly the right performance, but what I do want to show is how to do kind of a tenderness thing. So what I'm going to do actually is attach a few more of these vertices to this kind of rib cage volume thing that we have. So I'll just kind of make that a bit nicer. And then shift select that object, Ziva, create attachment. I'll make it a wee bit weaker. Give it a bit more play. So you might notice like this area here is starting to look a bit, if I play a few more frames, it can look a bit stretchy. And when you have a tendinous material, tendons generally don't stretch, but they are able, it's more akin to string or something like that, where they can't move, or they can't stretch or compress in one direction, but they can still flop around and shear and bend and things. So what I'm going to do is model that using a fiber. So in future releases of Ziva, you won't have to do this, but for now it's kind of a cool trick to be able to do that. So if I make a fiber now, add material property, muscle fiber, and I'm going to paint off all the area that I don't want to be participating in this tendon. This. And then I'll paint C fiber 3 weights. This time I'm going to feather off the map a little bit so that the effect is sort of propagated through. And now what I'm going to do is, if I look at the fiber, you can see that there's this attribute here called contraction limit. So this takes a float value between 0 and 1, and it's not keyable. So you set it at the start, and what it will do is it will tell Ziva how much the fiber can compress each tet that it's affecting. So if you was to set it to 0.5, for instance, the fiber would only ever be able to contract each individual tet to 50% of its original length in the direction of the fiber field. So if I was to make this 1, it means that the fiber can't contract it at all. And you might think, oh, that's not particularly useful. But when you set excitation to 1 as well, now you have the force of the fiber fully pulling in the direction of the fiber field, and it's also not allowing it to go anywhere, which kind of seems silly, but now you have basically what you're doing is ensuring that the fiber is going to stay at its original length up to the strength of the fiber. So if I was to make, like, it's still going to stretch a little bit at the moment because the fiber is sort of relatively weak-ish. But if I was to make this, say, 12 times 10 to the 4, what's going to happen is, hopefully you'll see that that's not stretching now. So this is a kind of a useful thing if you were to do ropes, or this is how I did the trunk on the jellyfin as well. Did it like that. Just sort of a useful hack until our material model changes come in, or the feature at least comes in. But yeah, you have to be careful with values that are going too high because it starts to get a little bit unstable. But yeah, it's just a fun way of doing that. So I would also probably add a fiber for the rest of the lat if I was doing this. So create a fiber. And then I'd also make a line of action curve for this guy as well. So I'm just going to use the Ziva tools to make the curve this time. So into the Ziva tools menu, create line of action curve. And I'll create clusters for the endpoints. And then I'll rivet them to the bones as usual. Something like this, wasn't it? Was that the right one? Nope. I don't think I did those correctly. Where is that cluster? Oh, it's way in the wrong place, that's why. Okay. And then I'll also go through and connect to that third fiber. It's actually the fourth one. Oh, so I probably used my script then to create that fiber, so it automatically renamed it. So it's probably that one. Ziva, create line of action. Clear the cache. And it doesn't appear to be firing too much. You can also adjust the sensitivity of the line of action node, so I might try and make this 4 or something to see if that's working. It might be that I just, oh yeah. It might be that the endpoint of one of the curves needs to be further down the humerus so that you get, yeah, see in that pose it started firing. You're noticing that the scapula as well is coming through there, and that's, to fix that, that's a sub-step issue. So I'm only running one sub-step at the moment, just for speed. But as you kind of build up the character, you have the muscles that sit on the scapula anyway, which will help those collisions resolve. Yeah. Yeah, so that's really kind of the process of building stuff up. And then, you know, as I was doing before, I'd probably come in and add the biceps as well, which I can do quickly. See that, add tissue. And the brachialis as well. And so I'll just grab a couple of vertices here, shift select the bone. So it's really, you know, a handful of steps that you kind of get to know, and then it's basically variations on those steps for each muscle. It's not a huge amount of magic or technical expertise to it, I think, anyway. It's quite intuitive. Attachment. So again, I'll use the select vertices by proximity. Just make this back to 0.25. Select, you can see the wireframe that it got the ones I want. And then I'll make a sliding attachment this time, which I covered in one of the tutorials. Ziva, add attachment. I'm going to change its type to sliding, and I'll make it a bit weaker. I'm also going to have a fixed attachment on here as well. So there's no, if you make an attachment on a selection of vertices on a tissue object, you can still have more than one attachment on those vertices. So I'm going to select basically exactly the same vertex selection. And you don't see it because there's a thing in the way, the attachment's in the way. But if I go into isolate mode, I have the same vertex selection. And this time I'm going to make another attachment. And I'll leave it as fixed, but I'm going to make it quite weak. So 1 times 10 to the 5. So it's a combination of sliding and fixed for that particular one there. And then I'll do a similar thing for the bicep. and see what that looks like when I play it back. You can see it's pretty loose there because I haven't attached it to the brachialis yet. That's fine, I'll just do that straight away. Oops. See what that looks like without any fixed on there, okay. So it's still quite loose. I'm gonna also attach it to the pecs. So select, shift select the pec again, Ziva, add simulation component attachment. Again, probably don't want it that stiff. Bring it down to 10 to the 6. See those are following a bit more nicely now. And then when the forearms come up in this, you'll notice that there's an absence of a fiber on this bicep because it really does need to contract. Forget how far through that is. There you go, it's kind of there. So yeah, when that forearm comes forward, you really want to start seeing the bicep contract. So yeah, you'd want to put in a fiber pretty much straight away. See that, add fiber. And I'm going to make a line of action curve, Ziva tools, create line of action curve. And what I'll do is use the same line of action for the bicep as the brachialis. I'm actually going to pull down the one end of the NURBS curve so that because it's quite high up on the ulna there, or the radius. So what happens is when the radius bends round, there's actually not that much change in the length of the curve, but if you pull it down here somewhere, then the change becomes a bit more obvious. So I'll create a cluster. And then rivet. Same at this end. Create line of action, so select the curve first, then shift select the tissue object. I don't need to select the fiber specifically this time because there's only one on the muscle. And then fiber. And then what I'll do is create a fiber on this guy, the brachialis, and also use that same, I'll call this right bicep curve, and select the brachialis and make another line of action node. Should be able to see the shape starting to change. Did I make one for the bicep? Oh, I didn't actually make one for the bicep. I don't think. What? Oh, maybe I made a fiber instead. That was silly. So if you just want to delete a fiber, by the way, you can just grab the name of it and then delete it by itself using mel. That's kind of handy. Try that again. And my simulation is stopped. Didn't like that. Awesome line of action. So it's starting to fire there now. When that forearm folds up. Could also use a few more tets, I think. It's quite coarse, the tet mesh for that. So I can use my little button on the shelf to just progressively drop the tet size. You'll notice as well that when the arm comes in, it should collide with the rib cage as well, which gives kind of a nice organic feel. So yeah, that's kind of the workflow and kind of an idea around best practices. I think especially with attachments, do kind of see people using attachments too liberally, I would say. So you kind of just want to use them just where you need them and let Ziva kind of do the rest. So yeah. This attachment here, for instance, I could, just to show you, I could feather off the strength of it. So paint Z attachment. Which one was that? I can use my little script to get it. And so I could smooth this map, for instance. And one cool thing is that you get a little bit of transparency on the GL draw stuff. So you can see where it's being feathered off. All right, well, I could probably take some questions on that stuff if there are any.